congrats on the film.
Thanks,
Loved it. Loved how uncompromising it is in its sex and its violence. When you were writing it, did you get that same sense of kind of freedom that you guys could just...
Yeah, I think that was kind of the overriding sort of attitude when me and Weronika, my co-writer, when we were writing it, was just to never be held back by the idea of what seemed to be the sensible, tasteful thing, and to just try and entertain each other as much as we could. So it was a really fun one to write. And I'm sure probably writing it during the lockdown and stuff probably all fed into wanting to be that bit more wow.
Yeah, so this has been a journey, years in the making. What, 2019? Is that when the kind of
what started? Yeah, I think I was sort of like in the towards the end of Post for St. Maud, sort of toying with a vague idea, and then me and Vera sort of properly started writing it. I think just before lockdown.
Also with St. Maud, got the BAFTA nomination. What's life been like since?
Good. I mean, I think it's just been so weird that because it all happened to coincide with lockdown, and that was obviously just weird and surreal for everyone globally, that it's been hard to extract sort of which stuff is surreal because of the film and which it's been great. I mean, it's just been really lovely this time around to actually be in a position where people are like, oh, what do you want to do next? Instead of like just the crippling fear and self-doubt that comes with trying to get your first film off the ground, where it all just feels like, will I, questioning whether it's ever actually going to happen. So yeah, it's been fun.
So the process of getting this off the ground was just so much easier compared to St. Maud.
Yes, I mean, it was definitely, I think the scale and like the budget needs to be a lot bigger. So it wasn't necessarily easy, but it was, yeah, I felt a lot more confident going into it. Maybe for like a brief window, felt kind of like confident and fearless. So I just tried to sort of ride that and not stop and think about it all too much.
Also, it's getting its UK premiere, Glasgow Film Festival, in its 20th edition. What's that like for you?
It's great.
Do you get nervous showing it at festivals?
Yes, but we showed St. Maud here as well. So that was a lovely screening. So I feel like I'm amongst friends, hopefully. And also we've shown it so far at Sundance and Berlin, and I sat in for both of those, and it seemed to go down all right. So now I've sort of like pulled off the bandage. It's kind of, you sort of just start to like let it go out into the world by itself.
You can just enjoy it, enjoy the experience.
Kind of, yeah. Well, now I just don't sit into the film, so it's kind of like, welcome, enjoy it, and then just run away with it, and come back in and go, hope they like it.
There's also been a lot of buzz about what you would be doing next. Also, Love Lies Bleeding is that next step project. Did you pay much attention to that buzz? Did you indulge yourself in that sort of excitement?
What you mean, like sort of closer to the release now, or sort of back then? Yes, it's been exciting and nerve-wracking, and it all seems to now be coming about very quickly. I don't know, it's weird to have any sense of perspective on any of it, because I've just been like sort of so constantly thinking about this film for the last like couple of years, that you sort of, when people you haven't met start asking you about it or they've seen it, it's weird.
The film itself, a lot's, when it gets going, a lot happens frantically. I suppose in a sense, what was it like filming? Was it quite
fairly frantic,
chaotic?
Sort of, I think probably a lot of filmmaking is kind of attempting to like control chaos in a way. Like there's so many variables and things that can go wrong. It was pretty smooth actually, all things considered, but it was very daunting on some days. Just the scale of it was so much bigger than St. Maud. Just there were just more actors, more set pieces, period setting in America, stunts. This all affects all these kinds of things, which are all the fun toys to play with, and it's like all the stuff you sort of dream of getting to experiment with as a filmmaker, like when you're thinking that that's what you want to do. But yeah, when you're actually there, it was quite daunting. And you never, I mean, I think probably every filmmaker says this about every film ever made, but there's just never enough time. You're just constantly trying to like squeeze every drop out of all the resources you've got. So it always just feels, you're always rushing, and always feeling a little bit out of the depth, but hopefully that's when you make something interesting.
with it being on location, not a relatively small cast, but was it a sort of bubble for you guys? Was it like a family setting almost?
It felt quite sprawling, to be honest, because there's like Lou's apartment, which I think we spent the first week or so in there, so that felt kind of contained. It was just Kristen and Katy mostly in this apartment. But then the film sprawls out. There's quite a lot of different locations and different bits. So every week you'd sort of like, we'd move to a different place. So it felt quite sprawling, to be honest. But it was really fun though.
I love that it is set in the 80s, but it seems not to be like a main driver for it. It's its own style in a way. Was that always at the forefront in your mind when you were writing it with Weronika?
What, to set it in the 80s?
But to set it in the 80s, but not, I suppose, dive in too much to the 80s aesthetics and tropes, I suppose.
It's exactly, we sort of floated around where to set it for a little while, and then sort of landed on the 80s. As much as anything, it was sort of wanting to make it kind of pre-internet and pre-social media, because it's meant to be about these two kind of misfit characters who both feel kind of isolated and then sort of find each other, and that's just a bit more potent, I think, when they can't just whip out their phones and whatever. But yeah, I guess the 80s is just a decade that's been so done to death as well in so many films, and to be honest, it wasn't the one which makes me go, oh, I love 80s fashion and all my favorite music of 80s. Like, I was kind of wary of not wanting it to feel pastiche and to try and find a way of making it 80s, but with a slightly more timeless or even 90s kind of sensibility. I think at one point we toyed between it, floating between the 80s and 90s. Although then when you actually try to, when it comes to doing like the costumes and sort of hair and stuff, I was saying to Olga, my costume designer, like, because it kind of takes place in a heightened version of the world, but still has a foot in reality. So I was like, let's not go too nuts. But then when you actually look at pictures of what people would have been dressing like and looking like at that point in time, it's like, it was pretty out there, some of it. So it's quite easy to have a little fun with the look of it as well.
Of course, you've got Kristen Stewart, Katy O'Brian. Great performances. Much of a thrill, is it, when you've got these actors that clearly have invested in your vision?
It's wonderful. I mean, that was the fortunate thing. All of the cast were just very giving and unpretentious, I think, and didn't look at me too funnily when I was getting them to do all of this weird stuff. So that was very nice. And they all seemed, I'm sure there were times that I think particularly, like, Ed was so wonderful to work with, and I still can't quite believe he did it. But I don't know, sometimes I was like, I'm sure there's moments where he's looking around going, what is this film? I'm not quite sure what's happening. But it never showed it. And then I think they're all pretty pleased with how it turned out. But it was I think everyone had this slight feeling of like, I'm not quite sure what this thing is, but let's go for it and see what happens, kind of thing.
What did Kristen or Katy bring anything to the character that surprised you? Any little quirks, on days when they started shooting that maybe weren't in the screenplay?
I mean, loads of stuff. I mean, I tried to sort of. I mean, we didn't really have any rehearsal time. It was sort of, we'd have to figure everything out there on the day, pretty much. So it's sort of like, I guess, trying to strike a balance between, I'd have a very clear image in my head of kind of what I'd want to happen, sort of like need to kind of be specific and not waste time, but also have enough flexibility so that they have a chance to wiggle around in the scenes, I guess, and like find the most real feeling version of it. So that, both of them, they'd always be kind of like slightly rephrasing stuff, or if a line doesn't feel right, they'd kind of, we'd sort of figure out a way to change it and make it better. I mean, loads of stuff. It's like you feel when you're writing a script, you're to try and create these well-rounded characters that feel real, but it's always just when you actually have an actor doing it, they just sort of brings it to life and makes them real. There are lots, but nothing I can think of specifically.
I need to ask as well, because it's pretty distinctive, but the Ed Harris, with that wig,
the magnificent hair,
the hair that's got in it, was that something that just happened, or was that an image of the character that you always had?
No, that Lou Senior, who's his character, I kept I just said to Ed, I was like, I'd love it if we could figure out a way, the way you just look like we've never seen you before in a film. But I didn't quite know what that was going to be. So he suggested, oh, maybe I could have a ponytail. I was like, oh, great, that sounds good. And then he basically went off and got these really thick, luscious extensions put in, which was a lot more than I was expecting. And I think in hindsight, he then said, he's like, yeah, I was assuming you were going to cut them a little bit, but he basically sent me a photo of himself in his bathroom with his hair. And I was just like, oh, that's just amazing. Let's just keep it exactly like that. So yeah, that was him. And then, and I've said it before, but yeah, then I showed the picture that he'd sent me to Kristen because we were already shooting some stuff, and she was just like, shut the fuck up. And then she kind of like showed me a picture of her dad. And he at one point, I think, had similar kind of hair, which was very weird. But apparently it was just a complete coincidence. So there's actually a photo at some point in the film, which like we had to create a family photo of Lou and her dad when she was little. And we were trying all this crappy Photoshop kind of stuff and AI even. And in the end, we just got Kristen to dig up an old family photo of her and her dad and just comped Ed's face. Still looks a bit ropey, to be honest, but it was, yeah, I love that that's in there.
I love that small detail. Yeah, it looks totally menacing with that.
Yeah.
I think it adds a
it's kind of like a menacing riffraff kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think it's a testament to Ed's kind of prowess as a performer, and ability to be a glorious villain, that he can still be quite so intimidating with such a look.
You went all out with the violence and the sex, but made it look cinematic as well. How tricky was it to find that balance between realism and making it look good for the screen?
I don't know. It's I guess you're trying to make everything in the film feel cinematic. So everything that's happening in the scene, that's kind of what me and Ben Fordsman are always kind of trying to. You want everything to feel cinematic, I guess, and striking in some way. And I guess the violence and sex, the sort of common things. I mean, it's all choreography really, and like sort of, it's the first time I'd worked with a stunt coordinator quite so much, and then like an intimacy coordinator for the sex scenes, and it's kind of a similar sort of thing. But like with every scene, you block and choreograph it beforehand. I kind of think of like the relationship between the performers and the camera as sort of almost a bit like a choreography between the two of them. So it's just, hopefully preparation and instinct.
And just one final question. Are you working on anything right now that you're allowed to share, or even give a?
Well, I'm writing something which I'm really excited about, but I'm too nervous of saying anything about it yet in case I jinx it or anything. I'm writing a thing.
Writing a thing, is it maybe an action thing, or are you going to go with something completely different again? Because
probably a bit different again, I think.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, and best of luck with the film's release.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey you guys!
Hey you guys!
Hey, that's what they all say.
Hey you guys!
Hey!